Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the launch of our latest report, Purpose Up, Doubling Down in Tough Times, in partnership with Jefferies. My name is Tim Gallus, and I'm the Chief Idea Officer of Barkley, and I'm also the Director of the Whole Brand Project. Before we jump into our event, I'd like to share a bit about us and our partnership with Jefferies. Barkley is an independent creative idea company with offices in Kansas City, Denver, New York, and Pittsburgh. We build whole brands, and that starts with our own brand. Last year, I'm proud to say we became the largest independent agency to become a certified B Corporation. Today's event comes from our Whole Brand Project, which is our proactive lab and think tank with a mission to build a world with more whole brands. And as I mentioned, our partner for Purpose Up is Jefferies. Jefferies is the largest independent and global first full-service independent banking firm headquartered in the US. Focused on serving clients for over 60 years, Jefferies is a leader in providing insight, expertise, and execution to investors, companies, and governments. Jefferies provides a full range of investment banking, advisory, sales and trading, research and wealth management services across all products in the Americas, Europe, and Asia. Our partnership with Jefferies allows us to share Barkley's perspective as modern consumer experts, along with Jefferies' deep investment expertise, all related to brand involvement in purpose-driven environmental and social issues, which are really the core tenets of sustainability. Business leaders today are facing incredible pressures, as we all know, including an anticipated recession. But they may not be feeling the need right now to focus on or prioritize on sustainability issues. But what if organizational purpose and leadership and the integration of environmental and social initiatives could actually provide brands with the advantage needed to solve their challenges? We know they can. Whole brands, those that see everything they do as the brand, from sustainability plans, internal culture, product and service innovation, design and experience, to content and advertising, dominate the market. At the center of the top scoring brands in our latest State of the Whole Brand report, we studied a metric we call purpose power, which is the percentage of consumers who perceive that a brand stands for something more than making money. Brands that have a clear, decisive, and inspiring purpose do much better than brands that don't. We found there's a positive correlation between a brand's purpose and just how well they perform in the market. In fact, a brand's purpose power can predict 41% of how well a brand actually does in the market. 41% is a very powerful statistic. But purpose is not an isolated idea, and it's not a marketing tool. Purpose is an everything tool that can and should guide and inspire all brand actions inside and out. At Barkley, we believe leading with purpose and applying whole brand thinking to every decision can help turn your brand's purpose into an unfair competitive advantage that also impacts the world for the better. Today, you'll hear highlights from our research, but you'll also hear from 5 purpose-driven brand leaders we've had the pleasure of speaking with over the course of the last several months as we put this report together. They all have their own unique views on the role purpose plays within their brands, but one thing we all agree on is that the ecosystem of business and finance is going through a paradigm shift, a shift on how consumers, investors, regulators, and brands must operate in today's market. There's never been a better time to be an amazing brand, what we call a whole brand. The world isn't waiting for government to save it. It's looking for change makers. And today, since you are here with us, we consider you change makers. The world is looking for good brands, brands as a force for good. So it's time to double down on purpose. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce 2 of my Barkley partners, collaborators, and co-conspirators, Lindsay DeWitt, President of PR and Purpose, and Philippa Cross, who leads our sustainability practice.
Lindsay, we need to come off mute.
Wow, I thought I hit that. Darn it. Great. Thank you. Okay, we're here. Thank you so much, Tim. I really am always inspired by your prelude. So we're excited to be with you today and share the latest on purpose. As part of Barkley's impact team, Pip and I have the distinct pleasure of studying what real people want from today's brands. And our latest research really shows that the majority of consumers want to buy brands with purpose on purpose. In fact, 96% of consumers say supporting ESG brands is as important or more important than it was 12 months ago. But we cannot pretend that the conditions this year are the same as 12 months ago. While we're still dealing with a global pandemic with new variants expected, we now have a war and record inflation to contend with. And as we're all reading in the news today, an energy crisis in Europe. So the list is definitely long. So it's hardly surprising that what has changed is the consumer's willingness to pay more. What we are seeing across the 3 years that we've conducted this study is that over 50% of consumers say they are willing to pay a little more for sustainable products. And those willing to pay much more has dropped slightly. So does this mean that value trumps values in a recession? We don't have a crystal ball and we can't necessarily, predict the future, but we can look backwards to some previous analysis of other recessionary periods. And the data from these Harvard Business School studies show that companies that go into survival mode and pull back from investing in their business tend to flounder in a recession. Those that double down on progressive transformation strategies do more than survive. They actually thrive. And what's common among these progressive companies is that they stay closely connected to stakeholder needs. And they use this as a powerful filter to make their investment decisions. We have had the opportunity of been studying stakeholder sentiment around this topic of ESG since 2019, as you'll see there on the slide. And we have conducted 3 waves of research and explored people's thoughts, behaviors, and motivations in their various stakeholder roles. So I'm now going to pass off to Pip, and she's going to share some of those key insights from our latest round of Wave 3 research.
Great. Well, thank you, Lindsay. Our research is really based on insights from people, but their views change based on the role they're playing, whether you're a consumer, a citizen, an investor, employee, or a business leader. But what we're seeing across all these stakeholder groups is the convergence of thought on the role of purpose in business. And that leads us to believe that brands that ignore purpose do so at their peril. Our report shares data and brand examples of how purposeful impact strategies are shaping brands of the future. And we've got 4 key insights that we want to share with you today to give you a preview of that research. The first insight is, don't tell me how you're sustainable, help me be sustainable. And this is a really big shift that we're seeing from passive to active participation from consumers. Americans are telling us they want to live more sustainable lives, and they just want brands to make it easy for them. So consumer conviction remains really strong, despite those challenging headwinds that Lindsay talked about. 78% of consumers say they want to live more purposeful lives. And in today's divided times, a consensus where 2/3 of Americans agree is not to be trifled with. And 64% of people are saying that they regularly buy sustainable products. People are saying, can you help me waste less, save energy, buy less? And can you provide that to me in a way that saves me money, time, and makes me feel good about my purchase? We see this come through in the behaviors that consumers say they're regularly engaging in. Things like working to reduce food waste, reducing energy consumption, and even some are trying to reduce overall shopping consumption in an effort to be more sustainable. Now, Hallmark is a brand that needs no introduction. It's a legacy brand, arguably one of the oldest brands, and even Hallmark is looking at increasing the amount of recycled content in their greeting cards and making those cards more recyclable. Later in the webinar, we're going to hear from their VP of Enterprise Sustainability, Kristen Edie, to give us more insights. Our next insight is around citizens, and the insight really is that as ESG goes mainstream, the backlash begins, and brands need to turn purpose into protection to weather that storm. What we're really seeing is a faith and trust in government institutions really declining, and our dependence on brands is really growing. And as more brands step into this role and make their voice heard, what and how we buy and what brands we recommend to our friends and family is becoming a core part of our self-identity. And this flows into how consumers see themselves and how we see differences in behavior along partisan lines. So, for example, 2/3 of Democrats say that they really try to buy sustainable products regularly. Now, this drops to 50% for Republicans, but what is more startling is 50% of Republicans say they would actively boycott a brand that didn't share their values. So how we vote is an expression of our values and how we see the world. And increasingly what we're seeing is that is true of consumption also. It means that there's a backlash against ESG is gathering momentum. What you stand for as a brand has a high value, and you want to be able to do so by not adding any fuel to any already divisive fire. Now, a great example of this is e.l.f. Beauty, and they've used their platform to encourage their young people to engage in voting in a nonpartisan way. And we're going to hear from e.l.f. CEO, Tarang Amin, about just how important purpose is to their brand later in the webinar. Our next insight is turn your ESG report into actions to prove, not boxes to check. Now, 60% of consumers say it's hard to know if a brand is really acting ethically, and less than 15% are turning to ESG reports to find that information. But 45% of Gen Z and millennials are researching the brands that they buy before they buy them on environmental and social criteria. But they're not going to ESG reports to find that information. Instead, where they're going is social media. And 50% are looking for proof points or evidence of action that shows that a brand is really taking this seriously. And it's not just consumers. Investors and the market are increasingly looking for ESG rating companies to tell them who to invest in for the long term. ESG ratings companies like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, they use ESG ratings, but they also use artificial intelligence to trawl through consumer websites, communications, partnerships, and issue advocacy to see if those ESG reports really are aligned with actual actions that the business is taking elsewhere. So who's doing it well and why? Well, IKEA is a brand that is committed to making a positive impact for people and planet. And this means they're working on a corporate strategy of better materials, production, and working practices. But it also includes a focus on working on delivering more products that help consumers live more sustainably. And what you see on the screen right now is the Billy bookcase, but they're not assembly instructions that you normally have for flat pack furniture. They're disassembly instructions. And it means that you can disassemble that bookcase and share that bookcase with another user, extending the life of that product. So their strategy for IKEA is not stuck in their ESG report. It's living, breathing across every touch point inside IKEA, whether it's in these instructions, whether it's on the website or in store. And it's for that reason that IKEA is consistently highly rated in different ESG ratings schedules. So for example, it's A-rated in CDP, it's in the 90th percentile on CSR Hub, and was also voted in the top 4 of sustainable companies by GlobeScan annual Global Sustainability Leaders Survey. Now, we're going to talk to the VP of Public Affairs, Transparency and Advocacy, Simon Hensel-Thomas, later in the webinar to hear more about how they do this. Our next insight, empower your employees to become super advocates for your brand. So we cannot, whether you prefer the terminology, the Great Resignation or the Great Reset, we cannot avoid talking about the impact the last 2 years have had on employee behavior and expectations, and ultimately brand culture. 47 Americans left their job at the beginning of 2021, and 4.4 million had quit their jobs by April of this year. And the World Economic Forum is predicting that globally, the workforce, 20% of the global workforce will leave their jobs in 2022. At Barkley, we believe you have to win inside to win outside, and the strongest brands are the ones that really pay close attention to their internal culture. As these professional and personal lines blur, the why of work is becoming even more important as people are valuing working for brands with value more and more. In fact, in our survey, 58% of consumers told us it was really important to them to work for a purposeful company. And those that do work for purposeful companies are 3 times less likely to leave that company. And what's even more startling is that people who say they work for a purposeful company are 12 times more likely to recommend that brand to their friends and family. So that's some incredible word of mouth right there. Now, a brand that really gets this is Tony's Chocolonis. And they're a chocolate brand with a mission to eradicate slave labor and child labor from cocoa supply chains. But it has people clamoring to work there because it has a strong mission and also has some really strong retention benefits. And later in the webinar, we're going to hear from Oatly Sosa, the head of marketing for Tony's Chocolonely, about what it's like to work there. Our next insight is around turning climate action into an innovation brief. Now, when I first started in the space, we used to talk about climate change as something that was going to happen to our grandchildren. But in the last year, the United Nations IPCC reports have issued such a dire warning on the climate that it's dominated media headlines. Meanwhile, wildfires, hurricanes, extreme weather have displaced Americans from coast to coast. And we see some of these insights reflected in the data because today, over a third of Americans told us that they've already been impacted by climate change, and 2/3 will be impacted within the next 10 years. Now, this jumps up to 94% of businesses believe they're going to be impacted in the next 10 years, and 59% of businesses already believe that they've been impacted by climate change. And finally, 68% acknowledge that taking action with proof points is the most effective way to build trust in ESG messaging, which really pivots nicely into this example that we have from Logitech, because Logitech is putting proof of their climate commitments and their approach to climate on pack with a really innovative program to put carbon labeling. And later in the webinar, we'll hear from their VP of Operations and Sustainability, Prakash Arunkundram, to hear more about this initiative. So that really brings us to the end of the summary of the research. That's been a small snapshot of some of the key insights from the work. And as you saw on the previous screen is a QR code to download a copy of that research, but we will, and here it is again, but we will also show this at the end of the webinar as well. So now I'm going to hand over to Lindsay to just give us a few insights into the investor perspective on this.
Thanks so much, Pip. Today, we're also joined by Karina Elving from Jefferies. Karina is an ESG and sustainable finance strategist who joined the Jefferies ESG strategy team, and she has specific thematic areas of focus on natural capital and governance. She has her MBA from NYU Stern School of Business, where she specialized in sustainable business and innovation. And she was a part of the team that just introduced a new policy at Jefferies that every company they invest in needs to have done their completed their due diligence on ESG factors. So I would love to welcome Karina to our discussion today and ask her a few questions as we get into this kind of topic around the investor perspective. So do we have Karina?
Hi, Lindsay. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Thank you, Karina, for joining us. Considering this recent change at Jefferies and making ESG due diligence compulsory, I'd love for you to tell us how you're looking at evaluating brands today that is a little different than it was 2 to 3 years ago. And, what is unique to Jefferies in terms of your perspective?
Sure. So at Jefferies, we've developed a systematic and transparent way to make ESG considerations a part of our investment research process. We do this in 2 ways, bottom up and top down. So bottom up, as a research platform covering over 2,500 stocks globally, our analysts identify and prioritize the handful of ESG factors that matter most for their sectors and their companies, and drill into the mechanics of how those specific issues impact financial and operating performance. We use the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board framework as a starting point for this analysis, but very importantly, overlay it with the analyst's judgments on what matters for what sector and stock. So what this has meant in practice is that analysts are thinking explicitly about ESG issues that are material to their companies, which in all likelihood they were already thinking about before, but now it's done with an explicit focus and clarity. And our analysts even go so far as to propose the most important 2 to 3 questions that our investor clients should ask corporate management if they want to understand how these material issues could play themselves out at the individual company level. And then from a top-down perspective, we're focused on how 3 big themes are impacting fund flows and corporate strategy. The first is net zero and natural capital. The second is human capital and corporate culture. And the third is ESG policy and regulation. And for each of these issues, we've seen in the past 3 years an enormous increase in attention from investors, businesses, technologists, regulators, and customers, all of which is changing the financial importance of these 3 issues across sectors and industries globally.
Great. Thanks so much, Karina. I'm sure those brands are really appreciating the analysts' engagement with them on those material issues and the guidance that they're providing. A quick follow-up question while we still have you. As you are raising capital, what kind of challenges or red flags are you noticing about companies that make them an investment risk? I think a lot of our brands joining us today might like to hear that. You know, what's a red flag and or is making your jobs harder?
Sure. So I'll just start by reminding the audience that I sit within our equity research department. So I'm not involved day-to-day in capital raising for companies, although of course Jefferies as a firm is highly active in that business. But I would say that there are 3 major issues that are on the minds of capital allocators with regards to companies in the whole ESG space. The first is changing consumer preferences. So investors are wondering whether a company's products and services will still be of interest to customers in the next 5 or 10 or 15 years, given all the changes in customer preferences around sustainability, changes in regulation that are marketing green products as more desirable and gray products as less desirable, and so on. And this is a very real concern for investors in the energy and commodity space, but it's also true across the board. The second is changing investor preferences. So our investor clients are in a position now where they need to defend their investments to their clients, the asset owners, from a green and ESG perspective. And as a result, companies need to really demonstrate that they'll be evolving their business model generally and using new capital specifically for green projects. And this is why the whole sustainability bond space has grown exponentially in the last 10 years. And then third is just question marks around the political backlash. So today, ESG and sustainability find themselves in the middle of political debates and arguments. And this is a major concern and challenge for companies that we research and cover.
Excellent. Yes, that lends itself well to some of what we were seeing in terms of the political turmoil that does exist around this topic. And we're going to get into some of those details in a little bit further as we get into the conversation. So thank you so much, Karina, for joining us for a few minutes. We really appreciate the partnership of Jefferies and your insights into the conversation today.
Of course. Thank you so much.
I now want to shift to share an example of a brand that is consistently rated highly for their ESG disclosure, whether through CDP or CSR Hub, and that brand is IKEA. You heard Pip reference them a little earlier today. They are known for their legendary flat pack model, but IKEA's purpose also seeks to both democratize design and create a positive impact on people and planet, which we love. You know, this involves working on a corporate strategy of better materials, better production, better working practices. But critically, it also includes a focus on products that really help people live more sustainably. And their message is communicated through all consumer touch points, from the experiences in store to online, in their digital catalogs, to the very essence of their business, which is that flat pack furniture production. So last week, we had an opportunity to speak with Simon Hensel-Thomas, their Director and VP of Public Affairs, Transparency, and Advocacy, about the work that IKEA is doing to communicate to consumers. And here is a little bit about what he shared with us. We've got some great clips from him.
Still much more to do, but we've taken some good steps in IKEA. For us, it's important we give consumers the right information. We know it's a big barrier to action for them in taking action on people and planet. So we have a responsibility to create a movement and set that example. So we've done things like we've improved our navigation for consumers in store and online to find more sustainable choices in IKEA, products that will help them live a more sustainable life, for example. We launched in the last couple of years these super cool circular hubs in stores where customers are able to bring back pre-loved furniture, they're able to sell it, they're able to refurbish and buy previously loved items as well. And that's now in 80% of our stores globally, and we try and direct consumers to those areas. We also launched in the last couple of years a sustainable living store, which is now 97% implemented globally. And that, again, is to try and navigate consumers towards those more sustainable choices within the product range that will help them to improve their impacts. So lots more to do. We're humble in that, but we feel we've taken some good steps in helping consumers to make the right choice.
What I think is so powerful about IKEA's actions is not just the consistency of the communication, but also that they have really internalized the consumer insight of enabling sustainable behaviors. In other words, making sustainable choices not just easy, but actually the default choice for their consumer. And also that they understand the guilt and the concern that many of us have about waste and reuse. And they're not just piloting something, they're actually scaling solutions that really addresses a consumer pain point. I want to transition now to how IKEA is approaching its ratings on ESG, because we're often asked by companies to give advice on how to improve ESG ratings. And here is some unique insights from Simon.
Inca is the largest franchisee to operate stores under the IKEA brand, and IKEA as well is not a publicly listed company. So we choose to disclose voluntarily because we think it's the right thing to do, and because we think consumers, co-workers, stakeholders, customers deserve to know what's going on in IKEA. And maybe just also the starting point on ESG ratings. So for us, the high ratings and the disclosure should be an outcome, but they shouldn't be the driver of that strong ESG performance. So we shouldn't do it because we want the good ratings. The best place to start is actually start with your values, start with your vision, start with your strategy and the plan, and then, of course, report transparently on that and what you're doing. We try and help co-workers and leaders live and breathe that plan. And we're also working towards non-financial goals at the same level as financial. So, for example, we make investment decisions now based on both financial and climate factors, for example, which I think is critical if you're going to end up with a good ESG performance. And then just some observations that I have. I think for a strong ESG performance, you need an anchored planning, forecasting, reporting, and steering cycle. Everything integrated. Don't overemphasize the E, the S, or the G. It should be E, S, and G. And that will better enable us to set targets, monitor, and achieve our plans towards our 2030 ambitions around sustainability and E, S, and G.
What really strikes me is the high level of transparency that they provide as a private company. This level of transparency is increasingly going to be compulsory for publicly listed companies in the US. But in Europe, new legislation and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive requires that it become compulsory for privately held businesses too. And so, that level of disclosure is coming. It's really interesting to see companies like IKEA get out in front of this regulatory change and begin to, incorporate that level of transparency now in this moment. So we still have Karina on the phone. I'd love, Karina, I know you've seen the clips and some of the interviews with the IKEA team. What are your thoughts on their approach to ESG?
Yeah, I think IKEA's ESG due diligence ethos largely aligns with how we're thinking about ESG at Jefferies. Firstly, the driver behind IKEA's ESG performance is their values and vision, which are integrated into the company's strategy and plan. And particularly given increased focus on greenwashing from regulators, we feel that ESG should be driven by a genuine desire to account for these factors in strategic and investment decisions to ensure, that you're not saying something that you're not doing in practice. And of course, it is notable that they are a private company doing this. And then secondly, IKEA is an advocate for voluntary disclosure, and we agree that ESG integration needs to be transparent and that disclosure is the primary avenue for ensuring this.
Great. Thank you so much, Karina. We so appreciate your thoughts and for you dialing in to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
One thing that really strikes me is how IKEA is so laser focused on their stakeholders, their customers, their coworkers, their consumers. They really believe that all of these stakeholders have a right to know, what's going on with the company. In fact, one of the things that we increasingly see from leaders in sustainability is higher awareness and engagement of stakeholders, a multi-stakeholder approach. This also attempts and allows them to attempt these co-creation solutions with consumers. And so here is another excerpt from our interview with Simon that truly touches on this collaboration.
IKEA has been very humble and very Swedish in how we engage, which maybe has meant we've been quite quiet and not engaging as much as we could have done in some of these dialogues and debates. So in the last few years, we've really tried to improve that, really engage positively with a whole wide, diverse range of stakeholders on what they think of IKEA and how we could improve and how we could do better. So one example is a platform we've built called One Home, One Planet, which is an event, but it's more than that. It's where we come together with NGOs, with activists, with innovators, a whole wide range of stakeholders to co-create solutions for sustainability challenges we in IKEA face, but also the wider world faces, of course, because these are systemic challenges. So that's become a really nice platform where we're able to have that two-way dialogue and improve as a business and also find solutions. So we love that, and we're going to build on that. Another exciting thing we've introduced is a Young Leaders Forum, where we've pulled together around just over 20 amazing young leaders who come in and they meet with our group management, our board, 4 times a year and meetings in between. They critique, they give us advice, they challenge, they give positive solutions. And it's been an incredible series of meetings where we've both learned so much from each other. They've learned about IKEA in the business world, and we've learned from them, and some great ideas and ways that we can improve, which we're really taking on board and working with. So 2 really good examples, and I think we'll try and build on those and look how we can continue to engage other stakeholders in the IKEA business.
Such great content from Simon, and I hope you all have enjoyed hearing a little bit more about him and the perspective of IKEA. And we're so thrilled that we're able to share some of these interviews that we've had over the course of putting this report together with everyone joining us today.
Yeah, those were 2 really powerful ideas there of engaging with stakeholders and bringing the voice of stakeholders into the business. I love that IKEA is getting ahead of things, even when they don't have to in some respects, but they feel like they have to, which I love. We were just at Sustainable Brands annual conference in California last week, and there was a lot of talk about stakeholder capitalism and how we're moving away from a consumer-centric approach to one that's more inclusive of all stakeholders. But our research is still consumer-based, and for many companies, the consumer remains king. One critical trend, though, that we have seen over the course of our longitudinal research is just how important social and environmental issues are to younger audiences. So, question to the team, what differences do you see in the data that we're getting between generations on these topics?
Well, our research definitely looks at beliefs, behaviors, motivations, and intention to purchase on sustainable products. And I think one of the key trends that we see is that the majority of the millennial and Gen Z audience has a strongly held belief. In fact, it's over 80% of the population of those generations that this either flows through to behavior, and they're more likely to say that they buy sustainable brands whenever they can. And they're more likely to feel the peer pressure from others actually to do so. I think as we were discussing this topic a few days ago, I was like, I feel the peer pressure actually from my son. So I can see it. He's just 10, but it is that peer pressure does exist. It is happening. It's also driving a lot of word of mouth and recommendation. And younger generations are much more likely to say that they're willing to pay more for these products. Now, they may not have the same income as other generations yet, but there's that critical, critically, I think that intention is there, and so that purchase power, is definitely coming.
Thanks, Lindsay. Pip, you've spoken to a lot of brands during the course of putting this year's report together. How are you seeing brands respond to this demand?
Well, I think it's clear that for many brands, this is really becoming mainstream. And if you're a brand that targets a younger target audience, then this needs to be core to your brand proposition. And we mentioned, in their research highlights, Elf Beauty. Now, this is a brand that's bringing high quality beauty products, skincare products to a largely teen audience. And they're doing it in a really kind of value-based way at prices that audience can afford. But critically, they're also vegan, cruelty-free, and increasingly fair trade as well. They're doing a conversion. So they're a brand that's available in e-commerce, but also multi-channel. So they're distributed through Target, Walmart, CVS, Ulta Beauty. So they really recognize that these issues around climate, around social justice are core to their target audience, to those teenagers. And as part of this work with Jefferies, we recently spoke with their CEO, Tarang Amin. And here's what he has to say about their target audience and the role of consumers and customers in making purpose foundational to their brand proposition.
Differences over time is particularly that younger generation really cares not only about what a product does, but they want to feel good about the company that's backing that product up. And so these values actually are absolutely essential in terms of their choice of what beauty company are they, or what brand are they buying, and what do they feel good about in terms of supporting. This is not only important to us, but it's really important to our key retail partners as well. So if I think about Ulta Beauty and their conscious beauty program, we're one of the leaders within that program. If you think about like what we're doing on clean, vegan, cruelty-free, a lot of the core values. If I look at Walmart, Target, in terms of what's really important to them, many of these factors are equally important to them. So it actually does aid our conversations in terms of our leadership with them, not only our leadership in terms of penetrating their supply chains of our customers, of how we partner to, instead of doing price promotions, we're an everyday great value, how we engage consumers with our innovation, our holy grail innovation that really brings consumers that previously only had access to prestige products at much higher prices and making that accessible. Those are all key hallmarks of how we engage with each of our customers. If you can offer the consumer something where they don't have to trade off, like when I look at our superpowers and I say, we have premium quality at these extraordinary prices, that's vegan, cruelty-free, clean, broadly appealing, and sustainable over time, and fair trade certified, you sit there and you go like, well, why wouldn't you pick this brand over another brand? And so I think that's our longer term kind of moat, is kind of creating this, and it takes a lot of work, because even in that, being able to get that quality with the value and then having all these other attributes at the value equation that we do, is I think that the piece that gives me the greatest confidence long term in terms of always leading with what's important to the community.
I love that, because we always talk about the business case for action and helping clients create that. And the retail opportunity is really huge. So retailers are very keyed into the voice of the consumer. And there are a lot of retailers, he mentioned Walmart, Target, that have set their own goals to meet very ambitious goals to meet social and environmental objectives. And so brands that are aware of those goals and can leverage this in their conversations with those retailers, they really have an opportunity to develop a stronger relationship with those retailers, with those customers, and stronger sales, hopefully as a consequence.
I agree with you, Lindsay. I think it's really interesting that he mentions Walmart. And of course, Walmart has Project Gigaton, where they're trying to take a gigaton of greenhouse gas emissions out of their supply chain. So I know with talking with other clients and through the work that we've done here, that Walmart is often a big driver of sustainability action for brands. And as you mentioned, Tim, we were at Sustainable Brands last week, and we saw Amazon present on their climate-friendly products initiative, which seeks to curate different products that have sustainability certifications through the Amazon app, so that you can more easily support sustainable brands. And what they're seeing in the last year is a doubling of the brands that are reaching climate-friendly product status, and that also it's leading to higher engagement. I think it's 10% higher engagement on the platform with brands that meet that certification. So I think we're really seeing this tipping point where it's gone from, an interesting attribute for a brand to actually driving more sales. So speaking about the climate, let's move into another topic of consumer interest and the need for proof when it comes to climate. So we just talked about those younger generations, how they have really strong beliefs and behaviors, more so than any other generation. There's also a really big difference in what they value as being important. And, every year we track consumer concerns on different issues. So in 2020, the number one issue was, you won't be surprised by this, public health. And then this year, across the mean, the biggest issue is economic uncertainty, and that's all generations. But what is different is Gen Z, consistently, the number one issue for them is climate change. I think we think that for this generation, it's something that they feel really passionate about, and it's something that they're looking for solutions on. And that's why we're really glad to talk with Logitech, because they're a really interesting brand that has taken this insight to heart and is working on carbon labeling across their products. So as I said earlier, we spoke to their VP for Operations and Sustainability, Prakash Arumkundram, about the carbon labeling project. So let's roll that.
Yeah, carbon labeling is for us is actually came from the belief that we think carbon is the new calorie, and everyone, especially consumers, should know what they're consuming. And so we voluntarily pledged to provide product lifecycle carbon data on our packaging, so that you don't have to go somewhere and find it. It's right there on your packaging. And what that data really shows is how much carbon was involved in actually sourcing, manufacturing, distributing it to you while you use it in consumer use phase and all the way to end of life. But it's also validated by someone other than just us. And you have that credibility that comes with it. The most important thing is the number itself holds us accountable to future improvements. So just to give you an example, our top selling mice, gaming mice, is 8 kgs of carbon. And an average American consumes 40 kgs of carbon a day. An average global citizen consumes 8 kgs of carbon a day. All these are data points. And what you want to see as a consumer, regardless of what you're consuming and what your baseline is, you want to see that 8 kgs of carbon from Logitech starting to go down to 7, 5, 6 over time, and your own consumption of your footprint go down over time, so that you get to half it. And you get to choose brands that can actually help you half it, and you get to influence your purchasing decisions based on where you're going. Our purpose starts with our vision. Our vision is to design new possibilities that extend human capability. And really our mission, the way we think about it, is to help all people pursue their passions in a way in which it's good for people and planet. Not just to be less bad, but to be good. And that is actually what our purpose is. And we have two core values within the company: equality and environment. And we think of equality and environment in that context of purpose, being open on ourselves, being authentic, but also being humble enough to understand that we need to drive change, not just within our business, but actually across our customers, partners, and consumers. Yeah, I would say technology is a key enabler in actually making people pursue their passions. We are actually in sort of broadly 3 categories. Work, hybrid work is kind of one of the things that we are in. Collaboration and gaming. And if you really think about us, we are actually enabling technology to make your passions, which could be work, play, or create, better. And that's kind of our purpose, is to actually allow technology to do that, and do that in a way in which it's equitable, and it also is good for the planet. And so that's how we think about it. And that's kind of our role of our purpose as it manifests through the technology of our products.
I think Prakash is so inspiring, actually, in some of his commentary. And we saw him at Sustainable Brands, actually, the year prior, introducing some of this work, which was very well received. I also appreciate how they've taken that approach to carbon, the way some restaurants that were at the forefront of calorie disclosure, like Panera and others, were many years ago. And as he put it, I think carbon is the new calorie. I thought that was, it's incredibly clever. And I think that's something that we can all be looking toward in the future. But putting that information in the hands of the consumer is just really impressive. And I'm excited to see how it impacts that point of sale decision making of the consumer, just giving and receiving that information at point of purchase. We had a great Q&A with Ken Ballou from the ANA and the report. And he comments, in his comment, he said, that, brands that prove their actions, can drive business growth. Marketers have to, should build best practices into their work streams to change stakeholder behavior, to build a more positive and equitable marketing supply chain, and also to communicate how they're positively impacting culture and the planet. And I think Logitech is totally doing that. The other thing that I think Prakash shares is just the inspiration aspect of it, the inspiration for their own internal culture. So it feels like a great kind of transition point for us to start to talk a little bit about culture and employees now, because we also have some great content regarding culture and brands building the right culture, the attracting and retaining the right talent in today's uncertain environment. 73% of US consumers want to work for companies that share their values, and they're 5 times less likely to leave companies that are purpose-led. I think we're starting to experience that here at Barkley as a B Corp, seeing our retention improve, and whole brands with that strong purpose, they really know themselves very well, and their culture reflects that, with that lower turnover, with stronger engagement. And today, we also get to hear from our friend, Idly Sosa. She's head of marketing in the US at Tony's Chocolonely. Tony's, if you're not familiar, you need to pick some up. It's an impact brand that makes chocolate. They're founded by 3 Dutch journalists who actually discovered that the world's largest chocolate manufacturers bought cocoa from plantations that used child labor and had modern slavery practices. And so they're out to change that across the entire industry, not just in their business. And so here's a little bit more from Idly.
One is the importance of having employee engagement is basically at the center of everything that we do. We're crazy about chocolate, serious about people, and you feel it in everything that we do, from what we do in collaboration with partners in the cocoa industry and our co-ops, to how we treat our employees, how transparent we are with our employees, our employee benefits, and just how we collectively fight for our mission as a team. We think we have to be very transparent, even when the news is not what people want to hear. We have to be very transparent. So it's something that we hold very close to our hearts, and make sure that we are transparent in everything that we communicate. An example is when we find cases of child labor, we include these in our fair report at the end of the year, and we communicate how many we found. And we also, by communicating that, we're also committing to resolving those cases. So next year, when someone looks again, we can say those cases that we reported last year were solved this year. So it's a tool to hold ourselves accountable, but it's also a tool to gain the trust of our employees, our team, our partners, but also our consumers. I think we have a challenge with our mission that chocolate is like a product that people want to indulge on, and you want to hear about the issues in the cocoa industry when you're trying to indulge in chocolate. So it's very much for us very important to kind of still deliver that message, but seeing how we deliver that message. So if you look at our packaging, you can see there's a juxtapositioning happening in the very serious message that is delivered on the packaging and the playfulness of the packaging. So we draw people in with the package, and then we deliver we deliver a message on the issues within cocoa, and invite others to join us in our effort to solve these issues.
Well, so great stuff there to unpack, but the transparency is what really blows away when you read the impact report and how much detail they're into and some of the issues that they're finding. And I think it takes a lot of courage as a brand, because even when you say your mission is to eradicate slave labor and child labor in the supply chain, you're dealing with big systemic issues, and it's impossible for any one company to have a full oversight to that. So I think their transparency there is something that I really appreciate about the company. And I think also just, talking with Idly, she talked a lot about how even pay is transparent inside the company company for those working in developed markets for Tony's. So it kind of flows through from transparency on what they're paying farmers to transparency for employees in the company. And that consistency, really speaks to that, what we're talking about with brand culture in terms of living it inside and living it outside.
And I think, it's interesting as they lead with their business model, there's another piece of transparency that she shared with us. You can't just stand on a platform of fairness for farmers if you don't reflect that in the way you treat your employees. And they've raised the bar so high, it needs to stay high. At our event last week at Sustainable Brands, Idly had this huge smile on her face as she told the entire audience that Tony has great employee benefits. And I just thought that was, well, of course you do. You're Tony's. What else would you expect from a brand with such purpose?
I think that's so true. She's a great inspiration. The brand is really amazing. But what we're also going to talk about is that, some of this work is not just for kind of the newer brands within the market. This is also for legacy brands and longstanding brands. And so this next discussion is really around innovation and supplier engagement. Of course, it's not also just about communication. It plays a really important role. But in terms of a whole brand strategy that flows all the way through your organization, it also impacts the way you design and the way you innovate for your brand. And so increasingly, as brands set science-based goals that are, goals that are in line with climate science and the Paris Agreement, they are committing to reductions not only in their own operations, but across their entire product line. And that means that they have to, rethink how they design products and do that in a really innovative way.
Yeah, and I think, and we spoke to Hallmark Cards. We mentioned it earlier. We spoke with Kristen Eady, VP of Enterprise Sustainability. So, and they have set a science-based target this year and are working that through in terms of innovation and how they work with some suppliers. So let's hear from Kristen.
Is playing a much larger role in our innovation strategy now. Just this year, we launched a new enterprise vision for sustainability that's focused on climate action. And part of that is we've set a new science-based target for our greenhouse gas reductions, and it's been approved just in April. So one of our key interventions to achieve this target is to look at all of our products and see how we can reduce the carbon footprint of these products and redesign them. And so we are actively redesigning them. For example, we recently redesigned 3 of our card lines, including our shoebox line, which is a significant line, to move them to 100% recycled content paper and also to redesign them so that they will be fully recyclable. So these are some of the things that we are doing, and we're going to be doing a lot more of them in order to reach our science-based target and our goals around the climate. We're really going to start working differently with our suppliers as part of this. One of the things we learned when we did our enterprise greenhouse gas footprint is that our suppliers and the emission and energy that they're using in their factories, both our raw material and our product suppliers, are the biggest contributor to our greenhouse gas footprint. So just this week, we had a great conversation with them where we started to talk to them about that fact, help them understand what role they do play in meeting our goals, helping us meet those goals, and also some of the benefits that things like renewable energy can bring to their own business and their own aspirations around sustainability. So we'll definitely be working with them from now until, really every year, continuing to move them and educate them on how they can be more sustainable by moving to renewable electricity or doing energy efficiency reduction projects to reduce all of our greenhouse gas footprints.
I saw Kristen share on LinkedIn actually just last week some of those conversations that they've been having with suppliers. So it's really inspiring to see how they're being incredibly collaborative with them. And I think the other thing that strikes me about her comments is just that, every product that we touch, every day there's room for optimization and involving, including more sustainable materials and thinking beyond the consumer need and use to actually what happens when the product reaches that point of the waste stream, and how can those raw materials be given a second life? How can we reduce waste? I love love her comments.
No, absolutely, Lindsay. And what I also think is really powerful about this is that we often talk to business to consumer brands where this consumer insight around the role for purpose and interest in these issues feels really important. And sometimes some of the business to business clients that we work with are struggling to see what should their role be in it. And I think this new program from Hallmark to engage some of those business to business suppliers that they have in the strategy is really showing that red thread all the way from where the consumer is on this issue, how it impacts consumer brands, and in turn, how it's going to impact the supply chain and business to business brands as well. So I think it's a nice parallel there. So I think, whether you're, working with consumers directly or indirectly through your customers, this whole area of climate purpose is important for everyone now to get engaged in this.
Great. Thanks, Pip, and thanks, Tim. I think we're nearing the end of our time, so we want to try and take a few questions from the audience, from those joining us today. And they've had a chance to hear from a lot of different brands and a lot of different categories. And so we are receiving a few questions. I love this one that came in regarding the PepsiCo CEO received some flack recently for being just okay with being the second most popular option to Coca-Cola in terms of sales, based on them sacrificing part of their market share to support ESG initiatives. And so when the good work impacts the bottom line, how do you reconcile that with a brand that is really in charge of a board, actually, a board that is in charge of managing that business's vitality? Any thoughts on that comment? I'm sure you were watching some of the conversation.
I'd love to jump in, and I'm sure Tim's got thoughts to add, but I think we've seen this happen with Unilever in the past year too, where the results weren't what the investors wanted them to be. And then, certain analysts identified Unilever's focus on purpose as the reason for it. And I think, as we talked about in our purpose power, purpose is really a correlation, not necessarily the cause. And I think the same goes for Unilever's challenges, not being directly related to the purpose initiatives. And I think the same is true here of PepsiCo too. I think Coca-Cola is the number one sponsor for a COP happening later this year in Egypt, the major international climate conference. So it's not true to say that Coca-Cola is also not purpose-driven. But I think there's more at play here, and I think this speaks more to the ESG backlash that is happening, that I think certain analysts and commentators would like to think that this is a reason that's detracting people from market performance. But I think what we're demonstrating through today's discussion, hopefully, is that really purpose is about being stakeholder-driven and responding to those stakeholders, whether they're in your supply chain, whether they're your customers or your retail customers. So I don't see how being responsive to those issues would be to the detriment. I guess the question to ask is, if PepsiCo wasn't purpose-driven, how much more, poorly would they be performing right now, because they wouldn't be listening to any of their stakeholders. Any thoughts to add, Tim?
Yeah, I think, we've said it earlier. I think when you think of purpose as a marketing tool and or something that you can turn up or turn down, you're kind of caught where Pepsi is, because they've thought of it as mostly a marketing tool and something that they could switch on or switch off. The great brands, as you've said, Pip, live it across the entire organization, and it gets applied to all stakeholders. And it's an investment in the long haul, but it's not something that's fashionable. It's not something that hits the criticism of the recent ESG kind of complaints. It's something that's baked into the DNA of the entire organization. And I think where you see these brands fail is when they think of it as a special silver bullet that gets applied to only a part of their business, like Pepsi versus Patagonia or any other really substantial brand that has it baked into every single thing that they do.
Great. I just saw another question pop up. Consumers wanting to know how to be sustainable versus just buying into sustainability. What do you think caused this shift for consumers to be more proactive?
I think they want to feel good about how they're living their lives. And we see that, they're concerned about climate and they want to personally feel that they're doing something towards it. So I think it comes from this awareness of the issues and wanting to be part of a solution. Mm-hmm. And I think also Waste is a big one. We see it all the time. People are really concerned about recycling, concerned about food waste. They want to be actively involved in that solution. They don't want to feel helpless or despair at what's happening in terms of issues in the world.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And, it's just, I think that was a big observation from the research this year, that it's interesting how far and how fast consumers and customers and really many stakeholders have come on these topics over the course of the last year. And, for those brands that are highly connected to all of their stakeholders, they're definitely better prepared for future success and better prepared to weather, what could be a challenging, economic year as we look ahead to 2023. So we are at our hour. Any parting thoughts from you, Pip or Tim, as we close out today?
I'm going to let Tim go first. Go, Tim.
I would say that every brand has to consider this now, has to double down on purpose, from category leaders to legacy brands. It's not an opportunity reserved for startups or newer brands. If you want to stay relevant and really drive the entire brand and not get into the trouble like a Pepsi, you have to double down on purpose. And as I always say, may the most whole brands win.
So true. I think, Lindsay, if I can, it's just, it's amazing how far the consumer has come. In the 3 years that we've been doing this wave, we're seeing commitment on beliefs, values, and actions increase every year. And I think that, brands that are really connected to their stakeholders, their consumers, you can't help but act on this. And this is what you need to be really prepared for the future.
Great. Thank you both for joining today. And thanks for our audience for participating. There is the QR code to download Purpose Up if you haven't had a time to dive into it yet. Hopefully we gave you a quick overview today and shared with you some of the great conversations we've been having as we put together this year's report. We look forward to continuing to engage with you through the whole brand project.